Okay, 8th graders, this video is to walk you through the sci-fi and fantasy notes. This is for those of you that are not in class on Tuesday and need to make up the notes. Make sure you have a copy of the fill-in-the-blank note sheet. You can either get a paper copy from the agenda wall, or you can download the digital copy and follow along, filling in the missing words as you go. Okay, so purpose of this notes, remember you're not going to be tested on this information. You are just going to be looking at needing to know the information in order to be successful in our Lit Circle unit. Okay, so our entire quarter 2 is all going to be sci-fi and fantasy lit circles, which means that you will be picking a book tomorrow in class, and it will either be a sci-fi novel or a fantasy novel, and you will be reading that alongside working with your group to have in-depth conversations, discussions about the book, doing some assignments alongside it, and learning some of those essential skills. Okay, so first and foremost, we need to know what is the difference between science fiction and fantasy, and we need to know this so that we know what we're getting ourselves into when we pick a book tomorrow. So first, we're going to look at science fiction. Science fiction is broad, so lots of topics that it could cover, but usually it's going to be imaginative and futuristic. So a lot of your space exploration and time travel, parallel universes, aliens, these are all science fiction. I like to think like science fiction is something that could happen in our world, maybe in the future, right? Or if something else had changed in our world, it would have been possible on our planet, in our world. So if you think about like Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every single one of those movies is sci-fi, dealing with science and technology, and then different settings, so out in space or on a different planet. Basically, the key thing to look for is that like techie piece. Okay? It's very, very broad, meaning it can be kind of including science in a lot of different ways. It can be very, very different. Sci-fi stories might not have a lot in common, but you're going to be able to find that science part in the fiction story. So sci-fi means science fiction. Somewhere, somehow, science is involved. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean like biology, cell biology science. It could be physical science, like what you're learning in G's class with rocks and weather. It could be, astronomy with the stars, or it could be going out into space. It could be new inventions, new ways of travel, futuristic science, things we haven't invented yet, but there is science involved somehow. Okay? Usually it's going to explore advanced technologies, again, time travel, space travel. These can happen on other planets, but it can also happen on like futuristic Earth spaces in their movies and books as well. So futuristic Earth, different parallel universe Earth, or looking at different planets or out in space as well. Okay. There's a very real thing in science and fantasy that focuses on world building. And so usually in sci-fi and fantasy, you're going to get to know a world very different than your own. It's not a story that could necessarily exist on Earth the way we know it. The key difference is that sci-fi could happen, and fiction and fantasy is something that would not be possible. Okay. Again, the last piece is setting. So science fiction is often dystopian, and we know that dystopian means it's like, okay, this could be the future of Earth, this could be the future of the world as we know it, if we don't change some things and figure out how to be better humans or something like that. Dystopians are working on looking at philosophical questions and moral quandaries. So they're looking at how can we improve our world before it gets to this point. Okay. On the flip side, fantasy. There are 3 main elements in fantasy that you can look for that are kind of those dead giveaways of like, oh, yep, this is a fantasy novel. Again, it's going to have that world building. It's not going to be something that you would recognize on planet Earth Usually it's on an unknown, made-up planet, a completely different world, that, sometimes fantasy books, they have their own maps in the front because it's a completely different world. You'll also usually encounter mythical creatures and or supernatural powers when you read a fantasy. Looking at mythical creatures, some of them might be recognizable as like an extension of an animal you might recognize from Earth, but cannot be found in the real world. Supernatural, right? They are not found in our normal everyday world. Supernatural powers. A lot of times we are looking at magical powers of some kind with no scientific background or explanation. It's just a different world where powers exist. So that could be anything from, Harry Potter has a wand to psychic reading minds abilities, or flying, or their bodies like having wings. That's almost a mythical creature. But having those supernatural abilities is very commonplace for a fantasy. Okay, world building is the last part. Especially in fantasy, it is complex. It is an entire world that you will get to know that is completely different from your own. So oftentimes this will include histories and lineage of ancestries of people, family trees. They'll have their own language. They'll have their own maps, like I mentioned, with their own countries, their own politics. And so it'll be very, very different. It oftentimes makes fantasy a little bit harder of a genre to read because you do have to basically sign up to learn a completely different universe than your own. Whereas science fiction usually exists in your universe. A lot of it are things that you might recognize even if it's just an advanced technological future. All right, again, two major differences. One is the plausibility. So science fiction, it could happen in the future, versus fantasy could not happen. And also setting. Science fiction often takes place in like a hyper-technological future, but within your own universe, within your own understanding of the world. And fantasy are set in worlds populated by mythical creatures, supernatural events, so not on your own world or the way you understand it. All right, we're going to watch bits and pieces of 4 different trailers on YouTube, and I want you to guess if it's sci-fi or fantasy. We'll see if this works in a recording. We will not be watching the whole clip. We're just going to do a bit. Okay, ad.
If you have an hour this week, you can learn 100 songs on the piano by learning just 4 chords.
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
All right. Even just from that, 20 seconds clip, we see multiple elements of fantasy. We can see we've got mythical creatures. We saw goblins, obviously wizards. There's supernatural powers. Harry gets his wand. They say he's a wizard. Definitely, Harry Potter is a fantasy. Now, it is one that exists within our own world and within our own understanding here, that the wizards belong on our planet. They live amongst us, but they are kind of hidden away from the muggles. So that is one that does exist within your realm of the world, but it is that supernatural beings and that supernatural history of wizards and witches and all of that we know from fantasy. Okay, let's go back. Let's try number 2. Is it going to give me an ad? No. Okay. Again, we'll just do a short clip here from Interstellar.
We used to look up in the sky and wonder at our place in the stars. Now just look down and worry about our place in the dirt.
Go
Go for main engine. Start. T-minus 10.
We must confront the reality that nothing in our solar system can help us.
9.
I've got kids, Professor. How long? Where are we going?
8.
I'm asking you to trust me.
7.
Yeah, talk.
All right, we're gonna pause there. Wonderful, wonderful, heartbreaking movie. It is a science fiction story, so it is set on planet Earth. It is a dystopian story, so it is set in kind of like, uh-oh, we screwed up. Earth has fallen apart. Earth is no longer habitable. We cannot live here. We need to go out into space and find another planet that we can live on. That is the premise, so you know it's science fiction because it exists on your own planet, but in a futuristic society with much more advanced technology. It is dystopian, meaning kind of our Earth as we know it is no longer. And then we've got that space travel, that advanced technology where we are out going into other galaxies to find a place to live. So that is an example of sci-fi.